The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Prince William stood at the tall windows of his private study. His hands trembled slightly as he held the official letter that would change everything. The royal seal felt heavier than usual in his palm, and the words on the cream-colored paper seemed to blur together despite reading them dozens of times already. Catherine was in the garden with their children, her laughter floating through the morning air as she chased little Louis around the rose bushes. Charlotte was reading under her favorite oak tree, while George practiced his football kicks against the ancient stone wall. It was a perfect family moment, the kind that filled their private photo albums and warmed their hearts during difficult times. But today would be different. Today would test everything they had built together over the years of marriage, parenthood, and royal duty. William closed his eyes and thought back to how they had met all those years ago at university. Catherine had been so different from the other girls who threw themselves at him because of his title. She had treated him like any other student, challenging him in debates, laughing at his terrible jokes, and never once asking for special treatment or royal privileges. Their friendship had grown slowly, carefully, like a delicate flower that needed just the right amount of sunlight and water. Late-night study sessions in the library had turned into long walks around campus. Shared meals in the dining hall had become intimate conversations about their dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Even then, Catherine had understood the weight that came with loving someone in his position. She had seen how the media followed his every move, how his private moments became public headlines, and how his future was mapped out by tradition and duty rather than personal choice. The engagement had been a whirlwind of public appearances, dress fittings, and protocol lessons. Catherine had handled it all with the grace and dignity that would later make her beloved by people around the world. She never complained about the loss of privacy or the constant scrutiny. Instead, she embraced her new role with quiet determination and genuine warmth. Their wedding day had been watched by millions, but William remembered only the moment when she walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey. In that ancient space filled with dignitaries and royalty from across the globe, there had been only the two of them, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. Now, standing in his study with the official letter in his hands, William realized they were about to face their greatest test yet. The palace had received information that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. Allegations, investigations, and media storms were brewing on the horizon like dark clouds before a terrible storm. Catherine deserved to know before anyone else. She deserved to hear it from him in their own private space before the world exploded with speculation and judgment. But how do you tell the person you love most that everything they had sacrificed for, everything they had built together, might crumble before their eyes? He could hear George shouting with excitement as he scored a goal against the wall. Charlotte was giggling at something in her book. Louis was demanding that his mother push him higher on the swing set. These were the sounds of their normal life, their precious family moments that existed away from cameras and royal protocols. William folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. He would have to find the right moment today to share this burden with Catherine. She was stronger than most people realized, but even the strongest person needed time to process news that would change everything they thought they knew about their future. As he walked toward the garden door, William caught sight of his reflection in the hallway mirror. He looked tired, older than his years, and there were worry lines around his eyes that had not been there just months before. The crown was heavy even when it was not yet on his head, and sometimes he wondered if he was strong enough to carry it with the dignity his grandmother had shown for so many decades. But then he saw Catherine through the window, spinning Louis in circles while Charlotte and George cheered them on. Her hair caught the sunlight, and her genuine smile reminded him why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. She had this ability to find joy in simple moments, to create warmth and love wherever she went. Whatever challenges they were about to face, they would face them together. That had been their promise on their wedding day, and William intended to keep it no matter what storms lay ahead. Catherine noticed the change in William immediately when he joined them in the garden. After 15 years together, she could read his moods like a favorite book. The way his shoulders carried extra tension, how his smile did not quite reach his eyes, and the careful way he spoke to the children all told her that something serious was weighing on his mind. "Darling, why don't you take the children inside for their afternoon snack?" she suggested gently, giving him a meaningful look. I think Cook made those biscuits you love so much. George and Charlotte needed no further encouragement, racing toward the kitchen with Louis toddling behind them as fast as his little legs could carry him. Catherine and William were left alone in the garden, surrounded by the roses that had bloomed faithfully for generations of royals who had walked these same paths. "Tell me," Catherine said simply. Settling onto their favorite bench beneath the willow tree, she had learned long ago that William needed space to find his words when something truly important was troubling him. William sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and pulled the letter from his pocket. His hand shook slightly as he unfolded it, and Catherine felt her heart begin to race. In all their years together, she had rarely seen him this affected by official correspondence. "There have been allegations," William began, his voice barely above a whisper, "about financial irregularities in some of the royal charities. The investigation has been going on for months, but now they think the evidence points to someone very close to the family." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. Royal scandals were nothing new, but financial misconduct was different. It attacked the very foundation of public trust that the monarchy depended on for survival. "How close?" she asked, though she was not sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Close enough that when the story breaks, everything will change," William replied, reaching for her hand. "The media will examine every transaction, every donation, every public appearance. Our children's schools, our private charitable work, our personal relationships with friends and staff. Nothing will be off limits." Catherine squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses from his polo playing and the simple wedding band that meant more to her than any crown jewel. "Do we know who is responsible?" William shook his head. "The investigation is ongoing, but the preliminary evidence suggests someone has been using their position to redirect charitable funds for personal gain. The amounts are substantial, Catherine. Millions of pounds that were meant for children's hospitals, homeless shelters, and veterans support programs. The weight of this revelation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Catherine had devoted years of her life to charitable work, visiting hospitals, supporting mental health initiatives, and championing causes close to her heart. The idea that someone would steal from those vulnerable populations made her feel physically sick. "What does this mean for us? For the children?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer would be painful. "It means we will be under intense scrutiny for months, possibly years," William replied honestly. "Every public appearance will be analyzed. Every smile will be questioned. The children will need extra security at school because photographers will try to capture their reactions. We will have to be more careful than ever about what we say and do." Catherine stood up and walked to the rose garden, her mind racing through the implications. She thought about Charlotte's upcoming school play, George's football matches, and Louis's first day at nursery school. All of these normal childhood moments would now be overshadowed by security concerns and media attention. "There is something else," William said quietly, and Catherine turned back to face him. "The palace wants us to limit our public appearances until the investigation concludes. No overseas tours, no major charitable events, no informal walkabouts where we might be asked uncomfortable questions by the press." This hit Catherine harder than she expected. Their public work was not just duty to them. It was genuine passion. Meeting people from all walks of life, learning about their challenges and triumphs, and using their platform to bring attention to important causes had become central to who they were as a couple. "For how long?" she asked, returning to sit beside him. "Potentially 6 months, maybe longer. And Catherine, there is a possibility that when this all comes out, there will be calls for changes to the monarchy itself. Some will use this scandal to argue that the entire system is outdated and corrupt." Catherine felt tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned early in their relationship that being part of the royal family meant finding strength, even when everything around you felt like it was falling apart. "We will get through this," she said firmly, taking both of his hands in hers. "Whatever happens, whoever is responsible, whatever the media says about us, we will face it together. Our marriage is stronger than any scandal. Our family is more important than any headlines." William looked at her with such love and gratitude that it took her breath away. "I do not deserve you," he whispered. "Yes, you do," Catherine replied without hesitation. "And more importantly, the people of this country deserve leaders who will fight for what is right even when it is difficult." We will find a way to turn this crisis into an opportunity to show them what real service looks like. The story broke on a Tuesday morning at exactly 6:47 a.m. Catherine was making breakfast for the children when William's phone began buzzing with urgent calls from the palace press office. Within minutes, every major news outlet in the world was running headlines about the royal charity scandal. "Royal family under investigation for financial fraud," screamed across television screens. "Millions missing from children's charities" dominated newspaper front pages. Social media exploded with theories, accusations, and demands for answers that the palace could not yet provide. Catherine sent the children to school with extra security, trying to maintain their normal routine, even as photographers lined the roads leading to their gates. Charlotte had asked why there were so many cameras, and Catherine had simply told her that some people were very interested in their family's work helping others. The first few days were the hardest. Every time they left the house, every public statement from the palace, every old photograph was analyzed and dissected by media experts who claimed to understand the inner workings of the royal family better than they understood themselves. William barely slept, spending his nights on conference calls with investigators, lawyers, and palace officials trying to piece together how extensive the financial irregularities were and who might be responsible. Catherine found herself managing not just their household, but also the emotional well-being of their staff, many of whom were terrified they might lose their jobs if the scandal grew worse. Then came the breakthrough they had all been hoping for. The investigation revealed that a senior financial advisor, someone who had worked with multiple royal charities for over a decade, had been systematically redirecting funds to personal accounts. The evidence was overwhelming: bank records, falsified documents, and a trail of luxury purchases that far exceeded his official salary. But even with the real culprit identified, the damage to the royal family's reputation was severe. Public opinion polls showed declining support for the monarchy, with many people questioning whether any royal charitable work could be trusted. Protesters gathered outside Buckingham Palace demanding greater transparency and accountability. William and Catherine watched from their sitting room as news reports showed angry citizens calling for the abolition of the monarchy altogether. Some held signs reading, "Our children deserve better," and "No more royal lies." The irony was painful because Catherine knew how deeply both she and William cared about helping vulnerable children and families. "Maybe they are right," William said quietly one evening as they watched yet another critical news report. "Maybe the institution is too damaged to continue serving the people effectively." Catherine turned off the television and moved to sit beside him on the sofa. "Do you remember why we fell in love with our charitable work?" she asked. William nodded. "Because we met people who needed our help, and we realized we could make a real difference in their lives." "Exactly. And do you think those people care whether we have royal titles or live in palaces? Do you think the homeless veterans you visit, or the children in the hospitals I work with, or the families struggling with mental health issues, are helped any less because of some financial advisor's greed?" "Of course not," William replied, beginning to understand where she was leading him. "Then we cannot let this scandal stop us from doing the work that matters. Yes, we need to rebuild trust. Yes, we need to prove that we are worthy of the platform we have been given. But we do that by showing people through our actions, not by hiding away until the storm passes." Catherine had been thinking about this for days, and she had developed a plan that was either brilliant or completely reckless. "I want to make a public statement," she announced. "Not through the palace press office, not in a formal interview, but directly to the people who have been hurt by this situation." William looked concerned. "Catherine, the advisor specifically said we should avoid making any public statements until the investigation is completely finished." "The advisors are wrong," Catherine said firmly. "People do not need more formal statements from palace officials. They need to see that we understand their anger and disappointment. They need to know that we are just as upset about this betrayal as they are." Over the next several days, Catherine worked with a small team to organize something unprecedented in royal history. Instead of a formal press conference or televised interview, she would visit 3 of the charities that had been affected by the financial fraud. She would meet with families who had been counting on funding that never arrived, volunteers who had worked tirelessly only to discover their efforts had been undermined, and staff members who were struggling to continue their programs with reduced resources. William initially worried that these visits would expose Catherine to hostile crowds and difficult questions she might not be prepared to answer. But as they planned each visit together, he began to see the wisdom in her approach. This was not about defending the royal family's reputation. It was about taking responsibility and finding ways to make things right. The first visit was to a children's hospital that had been promised new equipment for their pediatric ward. The funding had disappeared into the corrupt advisor's personal accounts, leaving sick children without the advanced monitors and treatment tools they desperately needed. Catherine arrived without fanfare, walking into the ward with genuine humility and visible emotion. She spent hours talking with doctors, nurses, parents, and even some of the young patients who were old enough to understand that help they had been promised was no longer coming. The pediatric ward was quieter than usual when Catherine arrived that gray Thursday morning. Word had spread among the staff that she was coming, but no one quite knew what to expect. Some nurses whispered nervously about whether they should curtsy or speak only when spoken to, while others wondered if this was just another photo opportunity designed to improve the royal family's damaged image. Catherine walked through the corridors with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the head of pediatrics who had worked at this hospital for 23 years. Dr. Mitchell had seen countless VIP visits over the decades, but she was surprised by how Catherine immediately focused on the children, rather than the cameras or the small group of officials trailing behind them. "This is Emma," Dr. Mitchell said, stopping beside the bed of a 7-year-old girl with bright eyes and a shy smile. "She has been waiting for heart surgery, but we need new monitoring equipment to ensure the operation can be performed safely." Catherine knelt beside Emma's bed, her formal dress pooling on the hospital floor. "Hello, Emma, I love your drawing," she said, pointing to a colorful picture taped to the bedside table that showed a family of stick figures standing in front of a rainbow. "I drew my mummy and daddy and my little brother," Emma explained proudly. "And that is me when I get better and can play football again." "Football is wonderful," Catherine agreed. "My son George loves football too. He practices in our garden every day after school." Dr. Mitchell watched this interaction with growing respect. Catherine was not performing for any cameras or rushing through a scripted conversation. She was genuinely present with this child, listening to her hopes and fears with the attention most people reserved for their own family members. As they moved through the ward, Catherine met more families whose lives had been affected by the missing charitable funds. There was James, a 5-year-old who needed specialized equipment for his physical therapy sessions. His mother, Rachel, had been working extra shifts as a nurse to pay for private treatment while they waited for the promised hospital upgrades. "I am so sorry," Catherine said to Rachel, and the words carried a weight that surprised everyone who heard them. "I am sorry that someone betrayed your trust and stole resources that were meant to help your son. I am sorry that you have had to carry this burden alone, while we failed to protect the charities we promised to support." Rachel had come to the hospital that day prepared to be polite but distant. Like many people, she felt that the royal family lived in a completely different world from ordinary families, struggling with sick children and mounting medical bills. But something in Catherine's voice, the way she spoke directly without hiding behind formal language, made Rachel reconsider her assumptions. "We do not blame you personally," Rachel said carefully, "but it is hard not to feel forgotten when the help you were promised disappears, and no one seems to care enough to explain what happened." "You are absolutely right to feel that way," Catherine replied. "And I want you to know that we do care, more than you might believe. William and I have children too, and the thought of them needing medical care that we could not provide terrifies us just like it terrifies you." This conversation was overheard by several other parents, and word spread quickly through the ward that Catherine was not delivering rehearsed statements but was actually listening and responding to their real concerns. Gradually, more families began approaching her with their stories. There was Maria, whose daughter needed speech therapy equipment that would help her communicate after a brain injury. The charitable grant that would have covered this cost had vanished, leaving Maria to choose between her daughter's therapy and keeping their family home. There was David, a father of twins born prematurely, who had been told that new incubators were coming to the neonatal unit. Those incubators could mean the difference between life and death for babies born too early. But the funding had been stolen before the equipment could be purchased. Each story Catherine heard made her more determined to find solutions, rather than just offering sympathy. She took detailed notes about specific needs, asked practical questions about costs and timelines, and promised to follow up with concrete actions rather than vague assurances. By the time Catherine was ready to leave the hospital, something unexpected had happened. Instead of the polite but cool reception she had anticipated, families were gathering around her, sharing not just their frustrations but also their hopes for the future. Children who had been shy at first were showing her their artwork and telling her about their dreams for when they got better. Dr. Mitchell walked Catherine to the hospital entrance, reflecting on what she had witnessed. "Your Royal Highness, I have seen many official visits over the years, but I have never seen anyone connect with our families the way you did today." "Please, just call me Catherine," she replied. "And thank you for letting me see the real impact of what happened. It is easy to talk about charitable work in the abstract, but meeting Emma and James and all the others makes it impossible to treat this as just a public relations problem." As Catherine's car pulled away from the hospital, she felt a mixture of heartbreak and determination. The heartbreak came from seeing firsthand how the financial scandal had hurt real people, real children who needed help that had been stolen from them. But the determination came from knowing that she and William had the power to make this right if they were willing to work harder and more transparently than ever before. That evening, she called William from the car and described every conversation, every family story, every specific need she had documented. "We cannot wait for the investigation to be completely finished," she told him. "These children need help now, and we need to find ways to provide it immediately." William could hear the passion and urgency in her voice, and he realized that Catherine had found the path forward they had both been searching for since the scandal broke. William was waiting in their private sitting room when Catherine returned from the hospital visit, her notebook filled with names, stories, and specific needs that could not wait for bureaucratic processes to unfold. He could see in her eyes that something fundamental had shifted during her conversations with the families affected by the scandal. "We need to do something unprecedented," Catherine announced, settling into the chair across from him. "We need to use our personal funds to immediately replace what was stolen, and we need to do it publicly, so people can see exactly where every pound is going." William had been thinking along similar lines, but hearing Catherine articulate it so clearly made him realize how radical this approach would be. Royal finances were traditionally kept private, with charitable giving managed through established foundations and trusts that maintained careful distance from personal royal accounts. "The palace advisors will be strongly against this," William warned. "They will say it sets a dangerous precedent, that it makes us personally liable for every charitable disappointment, that it exposes our private finances to public scrutiny in ways that could compromise security. Then we will have to convince them that the alternative is worse," Catherine replied firmly, "because doing nothing or waiting for slow official processes while children suffer is not acceptable to me anymore." Over the next week, William and Catherine worked with a small team of trusted financial advisors to calculate exactly how much money had been stolen from the specific charities they wanted to help immediately. The figure was staggering. Over £2 million had been redirected from programs supporting children's hospitals, homeless shelters, and mental health services. They also discovered that the financial fraud had been more systematic than originally thought. The corrupt advisor had been skimming funds for nearly 3 years, creating false documents and manipulating reports to hide his activities. Some charities had been forced to cancel entire programs because promised funding never materialized. Catherine insisted that their response needed to be equally systematic. "We cannot just write a large check and hope people trust us," she explained to William. "We need to visit every affected charity, meet with every family that was hurt, and show people exactly how we are making things right." This decision led to what became known as the Accountability Tour, though William and Catherine never used that term themselves. Over the course of 6 weeks, they visited 12 different charitable organizations, meeting with hundreds of families who had been directly affected by the financial scandal. At a homeless shelter in Manchester, they met Robert, a veteran who had been living on the streets after losing his job and struggling with post-traumatic stress. The shelter had been promised funding for a new rehabilitation program that would have helped Robert and dozens of other veterans get back on their feet. When that funding disappeared, Robert had continued living in a doorway outside a closed shop, believing that society had given up on him entirely. Catherine and William spent an entire afternoon at the shelter, not just writing a check to restore the missing funds, but also listening to Robert's story and learning about the specific challenges facing homeless veterans. They discovered that the problem was not just money, but also the complexity of navigating bureaucratic systems when you have no permanent address and struggle with mental health issues. At a food bank in Birmingham, they met Susan, a single mother of 3 who had lost her job during the pandemic and was struggling to feed her children while looking for new employment. The food bank had been forced to reduce their hours and limit the amount of food they could provide to each family because their operating budget had been depleted by the financial fraud. William found himself helping to sort donations in the food bank's warehouse, working alongside volunteers who had been giving their time freely, even while the organization struggled with reduced resources. He was struck by how these ordinary people continued serving their community, despite having no guarantee that help would come from anywhere else. At each location, Catherine and William did more than just restore the stolen funding. They also implemented new transparency measures that would allow donors and beneficiaries to track exactly how money was being used. They published detailed financial reports online, created systems for regular community feedback, and established independent oversight committees that included people who actually used the charitable services. The media coverage of these visits was unlike anything the royal family had experienced before. Instead of formal ceremonies and ribbon cuttings, cameras captured William sorting food donations and Catherine playing with children in hospital wards. Instead of prepared speeches, reporters heard genuine conversations between the royal couple and ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Public opinion began to shift as people saw this level of personal involvement and accountability. The initial anger about the financial scandal was gradually replaced by respect for how William and Catherine were taking responsibility and making concrete changes. But the most significant moment came during their visit to a children's hospice in Wales. They met a family whose 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was receiving end-of-life care after a long battle with cancer. The hospice had been forced to cut back on family support services because of the missing charitable funds, leaving parents like Lily's to navigate the most difficult time of their lives with reduced professional help. Catherine spent nearly an hour talking with Lily, who was weak but determined to show off her collection of painted rocks that she made for other children in the hospice. "I want them to have something beautiful when they feel scared," Lily explained with the wisdom that sometimes comes to children facing circumstances no child should have to face. When it was time to leave, William and Catherine were both visibly emotional. They had met many suffering families over the years, but something about Lily's courage and generosity in the face of her own mortality had affected them more deeply than usual. As they walked toward their car, Catherine suddenly stopped and turned back toward the hospice. "I cannot just walk away from this," she said to William. "These families, these children, they deserve so much more than we have been giving them." William understood immediately what she meant. Their charitable work had been important and meaningful, but it had also been somewhat distant and formal. Meeting people like Lily had shown them that real service required much more personal investment and much less concern about maintaining royal protocol. The moment that would become known around the world happened completely spontaneously on a rainy Thursday afternoon outside St. Thomas's Hospital in London. William and Catherine had just finished their final visit of the accountability tour, meeting with families whose children were receiving treatment in the pediatric cancer ward. They had spent the morning with doctors, reviewing the new equipment that had been purchased with the restored charitable funds. But more importantly, they had spent hours with young patients and their families. There was Marcus, age 6, who was halfway through chemotherapy and obsessed with dinosaurs. There was Amelia, age 4, who was preparing for surgery and wanted to become a princess doctor when she grew up. But it was their conversation with the Thompson family that had shaken them both to their core. 8-year-old Sophie Thompson had been fighting leukemia for 2 years, and her parents had been told that morning that her latest treatment was not working as hoped. The family was facing the possibility that Sophie might not survive, and they were trying to process this devastating news while maintaining hope and strength for their daughter. Catherine had sat with Sophie's mother, Helen, in a quiet corner of the family room while William played card games with Sophie and her younger brother. Helen had cried quietly as she described the guilt she felt about being unable to protect her daughter from this disease, and her fear about how to help her son understand what might be coming. "I keep thinking that I should be stronger, That I should have better answers for them, Helen had whispered. But the truth is, I am just as scared and confused as they are. Catherine had no royal training for this moment, no protocol for responding to a mother's broken heart. She had simply listened, held Helen's hand, and shared her own fears about protecting her children from a world that could be unpredictably cruel and unfair. When it was time to leave the hospital, William and Catherine walked toward their car in unusual silence. The rain had started falling harder, and their security team was encouraging them to move quickly to avoid getting soaked. But neither of them seemed to notice the weather. I cannot stop thinking about Helen's face when she talked about Sophie, Catherine said quietly as they reached the car door. I know, William replied, and Sophie was so brave asking me if I thought her hair would grow back curly like her mum's after the chemotherapy ends. They stood there in the rain, both overwhelmed by the weight of what they had witnessed over the past 6 weeks. They had met hundreds of families facing impossible circumstances with courage and grace that humbled them completely. They had seen the worst of human greed in the financial scandal that had stolen resources from vulnerable people, but they had also seen the best of human compassion in the volunteers, doctors, and family members who continued serving others despite having every reason to give up. Catherine looked up at William, rain streaming down her face, and saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. Without thinking about cameras or protocols or public appearances, she stepped toward him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders in an embrace that conveyed everything they were both feeling, but could not put into words. William held her tightly, burying his face against her shoulder as months of stress, heartbreak, and determination overwhelmed them both. For 30 seconds they stood in the rain outside the hospital, clinging to each other like any couple who had just witnessed something that changed their understanding of what really mattered in life. This was not a calculated moment or a staged photo opportunity. This was two people who had spent weeks meeting families facing unimaginable challenges, who had seen children like Sophie fighting battles no child should have to fight, who had been reminded that their privileged position came with enormous responsibility to serve people who had far less but often gave far more. The photographers who captured this moment were initially unsure whether they should publish such an obviously private and emotional scene. But when the images were released the following day, they resonated with people around the world in ways that no one had anticipated. The photographs showed William and Catherine not as distant royal figures performing their duties, but as human beings genuinely affected by the suffering they had witnessed and the responsibility they felt to make a difference. Their embrace spoke to anyone who had ever felt overwhelmed by tragedy, anyone who had ever struggled to find strength in the face of other people's pain, anyone who had ever questioned whether they were doing enough to help those around them. The caption that accompanied the photographs in newspapers around the world was simple. After visiting families affected by the royal charity scandal, the Prince and Princess of Wales share a moment of emotion outside the hospital. But the public response was anything but simple. Social media filled with messages of support from people who recognized authentic emotion when they saw it. The anti-monarchy protests that had been growing for weeks suddenly diminished as people reconsidered their assumptions about whether William and Catherine truly cared about the causes they championed. More importantly, donations to the charities they had visited increased dramatically, as ordinary people were inspired to contribute to the same causes that had so clearly moved the royal couple. The Children's Hospital received enough funding to purchase additional equipment beyond what the royal family had provided. The homeless shelter was able to expand their rehabilitation program to help more veterans like Robert. 6 months later, when the investigation into the financial scandal was finally complete, and the corrupt advisor was sentenced to prison, William and Catherine were asked by a reporter whether they regretted how they had handled the crisis. The only thing we regret is that it took a scandal to show us how much more personally involved we needed to be in our charitable work, Catherine replied. Meeting families like the Thompsons taught us that real service means being willing to share in people's joys and sorrows, not just appearing at formal events. That embrace in the rain had lasted only 30 seconds, but it had marked the beginning of a new chapter in how the royal family understood their role in modern Britain. It showed the world that even those born to privilege could be humbled by the courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges, and that sometimes the most powerful thing leaders can do is simply acknowledge their own humanity in the face of other people's pain.